I'm going to talk this time about Ānāpānasati, mindfulness of breathing. Ānāpāna means in and out breath, and sati is mindfulness. This is a very fundamental meditation practice in many Buddhist traditions. It's a foundation, and there are different ways of doing it. One can be mindful of the breath at the nose or at the chest or the abdomen, or one can follow the breath in the entire body. The method I wish to speak about is putting awareness on the sensation of the breath at the nose, which is probably the most traditional method in Theravada tradition, at least. In the Satipatthana Sutta, the phrase is to for Ānāpānasati is to place the awareness adimukha, which means literally in front of the face. And this has been interpreted in different ways, but generally it's taken to mean the sensation of breath at the nose tip, and this is certainly the method that's spoken of by Buddhaghosa in the Visuddhimagga. So it has a long lineage as a specific method. This is primarily a samatha meditation, which means it's a meditation that is focused on developing the quality of samadhi, and it leads eventually to the mind entering jhana. So we need to talk about these terms a little bit. One of the issues or problems I've seen over the years with people practicing this meditation is that they push too hard. And I think a lot of the problem comes from the English translations that have become standard, that I believe are misleading in many ways and actually detrimental to the meditator. And at the top of the list I would put the standard translation of samadhi, which is everywhere translated as concentration. And this really, so you'll see in books in English, concentration, meditation, developing concentration, etc., when they're talking about samadhi. And I think this is really dead wrong. When you see the definition of samadhi as given in the old texts like the Abhidhamma and the Visuddhimagga, the definition is stillness or stability. One phrase that's used is non-wavering. So it's a stillness of mind. It's not a concentrated mind. And I think this is the misleading phraseology causes meditators to narrow their mind onto the breath. Whereas the mind with samadhi should be an open, expansive mind. Remember that the state of jhana, which is the perfection of samadhi, the state of jhana is the equivalent of the mind state of a Brahma god. And a Brahma god can contemplate thousands of world systems at once. So his mind is vast and open and expansive. And this is the kind of mind we're developing with samadhi, not a narrow, tight, constrained mind. But it is stable, it's still, meaning that there is only one object. It's not flitting from object to object. And this is the key of, or really the definition of developing samadhi, is that the mind is stabilized and still, solid, filled with a single object. So with Ānāpānasati, we're filling the mind with the sensation of breathing. And what we're paying attention to is the physical sense of touch at the nostrils, which are compared to a gate. There's one simile for the mind watching the breath is a watchman in a room over the town gate, and he's watching people coming in and out of the town. He doesn't follow them into the town, or he doesn't follow them out of the town, but he pays attention to who's going in and who's going out. And this is how we hold our mind in Ānāpānasati is the sensitive tissue in the nostril feeling the air passing in and out of the body. And in this method, you don't follow the breath into the body, you don't follow the breath out of the body, you're just staying still at that one point and watching the breath pass. Another analogy that's used is sawing a piece of wood with a handsaw. The carpenter pays attention to the point where the saw is cutting in and out of the wood. He doesn't follow with his eyes or his mind the saw going up and down. So that's the first important point to bear in mind is the meaning of samadhi is stillness and stabilized on a single object. So the proper way of holding the mind then is not to push the mind onto the object, but to hold the mind in a state of receptiveness and expansive open awareness, but to only pay attention to the physical sensation of breathing. So part of the skill of developing Ānāpānasati or any samatha meditation is learning the skill of non-attention. That is, anything else that arises to the mind, whether it's a thought or a memory or external object like a sound or a sensation in the body, you disregard it. You pay no attention to it. You don't try and suppress it. So that's a kind of negative attention. You just disregard it and allow it to fade away on its own. Any formation that is not paid attention to will fade. It'll lose its energy and fade away. So you don't have to make an effort to constrain the mind. You just relax. It should have a relaxed feeling when you're doing this meditation. And just disregard everything. Don't follow your thoughts or memories or daydreams. Just allow them to fade away in the background like unwanted static or noise. Disregard them. And developing jhana, which is the state of perfection of samadhi. Developing jhana is a natural progression of the mind if the five hindrances are made quiet. Now this is another very important aspect of developing meditation is to know this list of the five nivarnas. The word nivarna means a wandering in the wrong direction. And these hindrances are not to be thought of as so much as roadblocks, but as side paths, as you go wandering off down the wrong path and the mind is drifting away. And these are five in number. There's sensual desire, ill will, sloth and torpor, restlessness and worry, and finally skeptical doubt. So let's at least briefly look at each one in turn. A sensual desire, in the context particularly of the meditation and developing samadhi, is much more than just the obvious falling into sensuality. It's really any movement of the mind towards objects of the sense doors. Sight, sound, smell, taste, touch. We're trying to stabilize the mind, remember, on a single object at one sense door, in this case the sense of touch. So anything else that arises through the sense doors is a distraction. So we try and avoid that as much as we can. And it's, in terms of developing the meditation, it's often the trivial kind of movements of the mind towards pleasant sounds or smells or touches that are more troubling. The jhana is actually a phase shift in the mind out of the sense experience or sense desire realm. It's a movement of the mind, like a quantum shift, a change in level from the kama bhumi, the sense level, to the rupa bhumi, the level of form. So any playing around with the senses keeps you locked in that kama bhumi, and you won't be able to enter jhana. You're entangled in the weeds of this sense desire realm. Ill will works much the same way, but in the negative. Instead of desirable sense objects, it's becoming upset or irritated by unpleasant ones. And this can often be very minor things, like there's a noise, one allows oneself to become irritated by it, or the body's not completely comfortable and you feel irritation, or it's too cold, it's too hot. And this also keeps you tangled in the objects of sense, and you can't lift the mind beyond. You can't transcend the sense realm as long as you're caught in these two, desire and ill will, related to the senses. Sloth and torpor is sleepiness, tiredness, dullness of mind. And it can be very insidious. You can just sink into a dull, dark space. And it's actually not the best practice. If you're dull, if you're sleepy, it's not a good practice to try and focus the mind more, to try harder with the samadhi, because you'll just hypnotize yourself, in a sense, and become duller and duller. You need to energize yourself first. These two, energy, virya, and samadhi, are complementary faculties. They balance each other. So there's a kind of a mind state that the Thai tradition calls bhavanga, which is a term they borrow from Abhidhamma, although they use it a little differently. They talk about a meditator falling into bhavanga, which means a kind of dull, sleepy state that can actually be kind of pleasant, but you get sort of stuck in there. There's no energy, there's no brightness, there's no clarity. There's just a kind of a dull sleepiness. Another name for this is mithya samadhi, or false samadhi. So you have to watch out for dullness. I think the most important way of preventing and overcoming dullness is with the posture. Make sure that you're sitting with the back erect and the head's not nodding down forward. This will help a lot. If it becomes chronic, if one's falling into dullness, then you shouldn't just keep trying to meditate harder. You should need to wake up first. So don't worry about losing some of the focus. And get up and do some walking, open the eyes, do what it takes to wake up. Restlessness and worry, uddhacca kucca, is agitation of the mind, which is obviously the opposite of stability or samadhi. It's the mind jumping around into the past and the future and unable to remain still. And this is, in a way, the opposite of sloth and torpor. When the meditation is not going well, you usually are falling off the middle path in one way or the other, one side or the other. You're either too restless or you're too dull. If you're restless, the cure or the antidote is stillness. It's very important to remain as still as possible, physically and mentally, even though it's difficult and may be painful. When restlessness attacks one, you'll never get through it by appeasing it. Meditators will come up with all kinds of excuses about things they need to do right now, anything other than sit still. But if you're restless, you won't get through it by giving into it and switching postures and doing this and that. You'll only appease it momentarily and it'll come back again. You need to burn through it by sitting still and restraining yourself. And the final one is skeptical doubt, vicikiccha, which is it's not doubt in general, it's a specific kind of doubt that it's a wavering of the mind, which again is incompatible with stillness. When the mind is uncertain, this is another translation of vicikiccha. It's sometimes used, it's maybe even better, is uncertainty. The mind is unable to stay with the meditation because of doubts in the mind. Is this the right practice? Am I doing this correctly? Maybe I should be doing something else. Whereas the progress is made when one just surrenders to the practice and just does it. So these 5 hindrances, whenever they're present in the mind, you need to suppress them, make them quiet, make them go away. And the mind will naturally, the samadhi will naturally deepen when these hindrances are not present. So the practice is intrinsically very simple, although fat books have been written about Ānāpānasati, and there's a lot of different takes on it. It's really dead simple in essence. You just pay attention to the physical sensation of breathing and don't allow the mind to wander down the pathways of the nirvanas. Now I should say something about, because it comes up a lot in discussions and questions, about the possibility of a nimitta arising. Nimitta means a mind-created image. And starting with the Visuddhimagga, there's a lot of talk about the nimitta arising in meditation, particularly in the context of Ānāpānasati, that one can have a simple visual object appear in the mind. It might be something as simple as a disc, a colored disc, or even like a star point, a bright star point of light. It might be a little bit more elaborate, like a jewel or a Buddha image. And the instructions in the Visuddhimagga is to stabilize the nimitta and take that as the object. And a lot of modern or subsequent writers and teachers on Ānāpānasati will follow that tradition. I think this can work for some people, but for many people it's a dead end, and I think it's most people. It's a distraction. The best advice, in my opinion, if a nimitta arises, is you can make an effort for a while to try and stabilize it. And if you can get a stable nimitta in the mind, you can take that as the object and focus on that instead of the breath. You're no longer doing Ānāpānasati, but it's okay, you're going in the same direction. You're going towards samadhi and jhana. But if the nimitta moves around, changes color, fades in and out, changes shape, then it becomes just a distraction. There's no benefit to trying to maintain that nimitta. You'll lose it, and then you'll go back to the breath. It'll reappear, you'll go back to it. So you'll switch back and forth, and you don't make any further progress. So if you're unable to stabilize a nimitta, subsequently just treat it as any other object to be disregarded as a distraction and remain with the breath. In this regard, there is discussion of a physical tactile nimitta, and this is particularly mentioned in the Vimuttimagga, another old meditation manual. And this, I think, is more appropriate for Ānāpānasati in general, for most people, most of the time, is that it's not a visual image, but the physical sense of touch at the nose tip changes. At first, and for a long time, one is primarily aware of the movement of the breath back and forth across the nostrils. But at some point, that stabilizes, and awareness is held at the nose tip, and the sense of touch becomes pronounced there. And the way it's described in the Vimuttimagga, which I think is quite good, is it's a light sense of touch. As imagine if you had a piece of cotton wool and were holding it up against the nose. You know, it's that sort of a steady, low intensity sense of touch sensation, and the sense of movement fades very much into the background. So this is a physical or tactile nimitta, not a visual one. And this, I think, is more appropriate for Ānāpānasati, and it is what more often occurs. Before I conclude, I mentioned the 5 nivaranas, which are things to avoid or get rid of. Those 5 factors. There's also the 5 jhana factors that are to be encouraged and developed. And that is vitakka, vichara, piti, sukha, and ekaggata. And I'll just mention the definitions briefly. Vitakka and vichara are a pair, and they're variously translated. A common one is applied and sustained thought, or initial and sustained application of mind. Vitakka and vichara are the mental energies that underlie speech and thought. They're essentially the mental energies that manipulate sankharas, or objects in the mind. And when they're used in the context of meditation, vitakka is the mental energy that strikes the object, that pushes the mind onto the object, and vichara is the mental energy that holds the object. So vitakka is more vigorous, more forceful, and vichara is more steady, gentle, peaceful holding of the object. So part of the skill, let's say, of developing the holding of the object is balancing these two. That vitakka should be used sparingly because it agitates the mind if it's overused. But if the mind is wandering away, you need that little bit of effort to put it back on the breath. And then once it's back on the breath, you just hold the breath steady with vichara. And the holding of the object is with vichara is compared to holding a raw egg in your hand. If you are too loose, it'll fall and drop on the floor and break. If you're too tight, it'll crack the egg. but a gentle holding is this steady is vichara. But vitakka and vichara are relatively coarse factors amongst the five, and they disappear with the fading of first jhana into second jhana. Second jhana is primarily marked by the faculty of piti. Piti has been translated as happiness, joy, rapture. It's a more energetic, possibly even ecstatic kind of a happiness. It's a mental factor, but it does have a physical resultant or correlate. One can feel it in the body, like a thrilling sensation in the body. And then that becomes the coarsest factor and it fades away, and the mind moves into sukha, which is another kind of happiness, more peaceful, kind of oceanic happiness. It's often translated as bliss. But then with fourth jhana, that fades away and the mind settles into upekkha, or equanimity. And throughout all four jhanas, constant factor is ekaggata, which is another one that the standard translation is a bit problematic, like samadhi. Ekaggata is usually translated one-pointedness, but I think a better way of phrasing it is gone to unity. The mind is unified, because it's not reduced to a point. It's still vast and expansive, but it's unified. It's not divided against itself, taking multiple objects. It's filled with the breath. So the best way to think about Ānāpānasati, just to summarize a final kind of thought, the best way to think about it is not putting the mind onto the breath, but filling the mind with the breath. The mind should be mostly in a peaceful, open, receptive state, not pushing itself onto the object, but opening itself to the object, so that you're filling the mind with the breath. Think of the mind as a vast, expansive space, and the breath is coming like the waves of the ocean and filling it up. And everything else is, there's no room left for anything else. Everything else is pushed to the back and fades away. And the mind becomes solidly unified on the single object. So that's some thoughts on the practice of Ānāpānasati.